The memory of the smoke was a ghost that lived in the back of Silas Thorne's throat, a bitter charcoal reminder that some fires never truly go out. He sat atop his bay mare, silhouetted against a Montana sky that looked like a fresh bruise, purple, swollen, and heavy with the threat of a summer storm. Below him, the valley of Blackwood Creek stretched out like a long-forgotten promise, the grass parched to the color of old bone. Silas ran a thumb over the notched wood of his saddle horn, his heart hammering a rhythm he hadn't felt in a decade. He wasn't supposed to come back. The law had a memory as long as the trail, and the woman he'd left behind had a right to a peace he had no business breaking. But he had heard a name whispered in a saloon-side brawl 3 states away, the name of the man who had truly started the fire that Silas took the blame for, and the thought of that man standing anywhere near Clara was a spur he couldn't ignore. He began his descent as the first fat droplets of rain hit the dust, creating tiny craters in the red earth. Silas was a man built of hard angles and silence, his eyes the color of flint and just as likely to spark. He rode past the charred remains of the old livery, past the cemetery where his father lay under a crooked stone, and straight toward the ranch at the end of the road. The house was still standing, though the porch sagged like an old man's shoulders. He dismounted, his spurs jingling with a sound that felt like a sacrilege in the heavy quiet. He didn't have to knock. The door swung open, and there she was, Clara. She didn't scream or drop the basin of water she was holding. She simply stood there, her hair pulled back so tight it emphasized the sharp, elegant tragedy of her face. She looked at him not as a long-lost lover, but as a debt that had finally come due. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was a canyon filled with 10 years of unmailed letters and the smell of kerosene. "You look like a dead man walking, Silas," she said, her voice a low, melodic rasp that sent a shiver through her marrow. "I reckon I've been dead since the night the barn went up, Clara," Silas replied, his voice sounding like gravel grinding in a dry creek bed. He took off his sweat-stained hat, revealing the silver that had crept into his temples. "I heard about Miller. I heard he's been circling this land like a vulture." Clara stepped out onto the porch, the rain misting her skin. She walked with a slight stiffness now, a reminder of the beam that had fallen on her leg while Silas was busy playing the martyr and running into the night. "Miller is the mayor now. He owns the bank, the law, and half the souls in this valley. He's the one who's going to save me from poverty by marrying me on Sunday. You're about 4 days too late to be a hero, assuming you ever were one." "I didn't come to be a hero," Silas said, stepping closer until he could smell the lavender soap she still used, a scent that nearly broke his knees. "I came because I found the man who gave Miller the matches. I have the proof, Clara, but it won't matter if I'm the only one who sees it." "You want to believe me?" She let out a short, jagged laugh that died in the wind. She reached out and grabbed his hand, not gently, but with a grip that demanded he feel the calluses she'd earned while he was gone. "You left me in the ashes. You let the town call you a criminal and me a fool. You didn't stay to fight then, so why should I trust you to fight now?" "Because I was a coward then," Silas whispered, his eyes searching hers with a raw, agonizing honesty. "I thought if I took the blame and ran, Miller would leave you alone. I didn't realize I was just clearing the path for him. I've spent 10 years trying to outrun that mistake, but the horizon just keeps bringing me back to you." The romance between them was a slow burn of friction and proximity. Over the next 3 days, Silas stayed in the barn, mending the fences that Miller's men had accidentally cut during the night. He worked until his hands bled, a silent penance for the decade of absence. They spoke in fragments, half-finished sentences over plates of cold beans, long silences where their eyes met and quickly looked away, terrified of the heat still simmering beneath the surface. He watched her from the shadows, noticing the way she tilted her head when she was worried, and the way she still hummed the same tuneless song when she needed bread. Every look was an almost moment, almost a touch, almost a confession, almost a surrender. The internal conflict was the heaviest burden. Silas knew that if he stayed and exposed Miller, he would likely hang for the crimes Miller had pinned on him years ago. He was choosing his life for her freedom. He lay in the hay at night, the locket he'd carried, the one that matched the one around her neck, biting into his palm. He didn't deserve her, but he couldn't let her belong to a monster. The emotional breakdown happened on the eve of the wedding. A torrential downpour turned the yard into a mire choir. Clara came to the barn, her face pale and her eyes red-rimmed. She found him cleaning his pistol, the cold steel reflecting the lantern light. "He came by tonight," she said, her voice trembling. "He told me if I didn't go through with it, he'd have the sheriff hunt you down the moment you stepped off this property. He knows you're here, Silas. He's just waiting for an excuse." Silas stood up, dropping the gun. He crossed the space between them in 2 strides, grabbing her by the shoulders. "Then let him come. I'm done running, Clara. I'd rather swing from a cottonwood tree knowing you're free than live another 40 years knowing he's touching you." "You didn't leave to save me," Clara cried, finally breaking, her fists thudding against his chest. "You left me in the ashes. You let the town call you a criminal and me a fool. You didn't stay to fight then, so why should I trust you to fight now?" "Because I was a coward then," Silas whispered, his eyes searching hers with a raw, agonizing honesty. "I know, and I'll spend the rest of my life making it right, even if that life is only until morning." The climax wasn't a grand shootout in the street. It was a quiet, high-stakes confrontation in the town square as the wedding procession began. Silas didn't pull his gun. Instead, he walked into the center of the crowd, holding a bundle of letters and a signed confession from Miller's old associate. The town watched in stunned silence as the ghost of Silas Thorne stood before the man who would be king. Miller sneered, gesturing for the sheriff. "Arrest this arsonist. He's a wanted man." Silas didn't flinch. He looked at Clara, who stood on the church steps in a dress she hated. He looked at the sheriff, an old man who had once been his father's friend. "I may be a wanted man, John," Silas said, his voice carrying across the square like a tolling bell, "but the fire that night started in Miller's office, not the livery. These letters prove he paid to have the town burned so he could buy the land cheap. I took the blame to protect a woman, but I'm standing here now to protect a town." The tension was a physical weight. Miller reached for his hidden derringer, but the sheriff was faster, his hand resting on Silas's shoulder, not to arrest him, but to steady the moment. The truth, long buried under layers of greed, finally clawed its way into the light. The crowd began to murmur, the tide of years of quiet suspicion finally turning. Silas didn't wait for the cheers or the gavel. He turned to Clara. He saw the moment her face changed, the hardness cracking, the decade of winter finally melting away. He didn't ask her to come with him, he simply held out his hand. The ending was quiet and earned. Silas served 2 years for fleeing the law, a small price for a clear conscience. When he was released, the air was sweet with the scent of spring rain. Clara was waiting at the prison gate, not in a buckboard wagon, but on the same bay mare he'd ridden back into town. They didn't say much. They were people of the frontier, where words were often unnecessary. He climbed up behind her, his arms wrapping around her waist, his head resting against her back. "Then be a wolf," she had told him once during those dark days in the barn, "but be mine. As they rode back toward Blackwood Creek, Silas realized that the West wasn't a place you conquered, it was a place that allowed you to survive it, if you were brave enough to stay. The fire was gone, the smoke had cleared, and for the first time in his life, Silas Thorne was riding toward a horizon that didn't end in regret.